Alright guys, Marrok Wolf here, bringing you a tutorial for the ice bases that I'm doing for my Narska army. So what you're going to need is a dark blue, a mid-tone blue, and a light blue. You can sub in like a turquoise or a green if you wanted, it doesn't really matter. We're going to be glazing the first layer of dark blue over top of this zenithal highlighted base. So basically, like, how this base was built to begin with is it's just like I poured plaster into a cookie sheet and then hit it with a hammer. That's it. Took the shards out, glued them down to the base, and trimmed the edges, and that's really it. And then we hit it with a black for with the airbrush to highlight it, and then I just used Vallejo Wolf Gray to go around the edges of all the ice blocks. And to sort of give it that light around the edges look that ice typically tends to have. So the blue that I'm using here is deep blue from scale 75. It's like a really dark green kind of blue. I like the sort of turquoisey colored ice. It works well with what we're going to be doing here. So this tutorial is basically going to be me painting ice and then taking it all the way up to wind swept with snow, so you guys are gonna get to see how that all happens and takes place and whatnot. So now we're moving on to a lighter tone of blue. We're just sort of mixing as we go here and painting while it's still wet, so everything's getting all wet blended. I'm working the brush around the edges of the ice because the edges of the ice are going to be brighter than the center. That's just to sort of emphasize the deepness of it, I guess. So I'm just kind of working my way around the edges of the ice. The first glaze that I put on is still pretty wet, so the edges are blending a lot easier. That's probably the easiest way to do this as a whole, is to just make sure that your paint stays wet, and then that way your blends will go a lot smoother. I did this massive base, it's the same size base Archeon's on, in about an hour. So now we're mixing in another glaze, lightening up the tone a bit. You can see it looks really stark right now, but as we move on you'll kind of see that this stuff blends in after. Like, you can go really stark with this and still have it look just fine at the end. Everything's got to look like crap before it can look good, so yeah. So again, I'm just working my way around the edges, making sure the center of it stays nice and dark. That's probably the best advice I could give, is just stay towards the edges. You can see I'm starting to put the paint on a little bit thicker now. It's still wet, so I'm still just sort of wet blending everything all together, which is something that I should really try and do more often, because it's fun to just sort of push paint around. So this next one is almost a pure, what color is this here? Caribbean blue from scale 75. So we're just sort of mixing that with Adratic blue, and again working around the edges, trying to work that turquoise color into it. I know everything looks really stark right now, but we are going to bring that down with a few glazes, so it will start to look better. Don't worry, don't panic. Again, I'm just sort of brightening everything up. One thing you guys are going to see me do here, I'm not quite sure when, at some point soon. All this paint is still wet, so you're going to see me sort of wipe my brush dry and then go in and sort of dry wet blend it, I guess is what you'd call it. I'm not quite sure, but it's just taking your, like, a clean dry brush. Here, I think I'm doing it now, maybe? Nope, something different, never mind. You're going to take your brush as it's dry and clean and go back into that wet paint and sort of move it around in a circle, and that'll help you sort of blend everything together. So now I'm glazing, like, super thin glaze of the Caribbean blue. This is gonna help add a bit of that cloudiness that ice tends to get. Add a little bit more depth, and it's gonna help blend our colors there. So yeah, and then we're just layering on the glazes, trying to make sure that our blends are nice and smooth, our edges are staying nice and bright, and the centers of all these chunks of ice are staying dark. So here I am adding pure Caribbean blue. It's more of it's like an aqua color, really, and I'm gonna mix that in more with the Adriatic blue or whatever the hell it's called. Anyways, this is like a super turquoise color, so as you can see, like, it's going on super like stark, like the highlights, but that'll all get brought down. Just trying to fill airspace as I fill this in. This is at like 2 times speed. Maybe I should have put it up to like 3 or 4, but whatever. This is what we're getting. So I'm doing this tutorial because I had a few people on Twitter and then again on the PMP asked me to do this. So there was a meme involved, and it was like Stewie beating the shit out of Brian, so I figured I better do this. So again, we're just making sure the paint's still wet. We're adding in more and more of the Caribbean blue as we go on, and brightening up the edges of all the ice. This will start to move a lot quicker as we move through the steps because we're not painting as much of the ice. So here I'm adding, like, this is pure, not watered down Caribbean blue that I'm adding in there now, and this is where you're going to see the technique that I was talking about earlier, where the brush is like fairly dry and free of paint, and I'm just going to go back in and I'm going to, in a circular motion, just sort of grab the paint with the brush and sort of push it around until it's blended in with everything else around it. So here I go now. It's like a magic eraser look. Oh, fantastic. Alright, so zoom in a bit, and there you can sort of see it really getting in there and getting those blends in there all nice and deep black. Alright, so here we go with the we're gonna glaze over another mid-tone blue to sort of bring everything back down. And I'm gonna make sure that the paint's nice and thin. Also, like at the start of this video, I had my mid-tone blue like explode on me when I was trying to put it into the palette, so that was fun. That's why my fingers are all covered in blue paint. It was a fucking mess, but whatever. Okay, so again, we're just glazing over that mid-tone blue, bringing everything back down. Show you the palette there. We're gonna glaze in a little bit of the Caribbean blue over top to try and bring it back up a little. As you can see, it's like super thin. So this is like what you'd put on if you were doing like an ethereal unit or something over like a white base coat or whatever. So again, I'm just sort of glazing the corners, doing the edges of the ice, making sure that everything is all bright in the bright spots where I want them to be, where the light is hitting it where I want to hit it, and making sure that where the light is hitting it, that there's a light spot on the other side, because that's an important thing about ice, is that it's clear, light shines through it, so you want to make sure that when you're putting your bright spots in, that the opposite side of the ice also has some of that. So now I'm gonna mix in some white. I'm using the Watercolors paint, and you can see I didn't even clean my brush. I'm just mixing in the white like that. Some fast and dirty paint mix in there, making sure that this is pretty thin as well. I'm just gonna start going around the edges of the ice with this, clean my brush off a bit because I got a little bit too much on there, and I'm gonna go back in and blend that back in. So again, just hitting the corners. It's a lot of like rinse and repeat with this to get everything all done. Making sure again that like all your bright spots have an opposite bright spot so that it makes sense light wise. Now we're taking paint off the brush, and we're going to go back in with the dry brush and in a circular motion with your brush, just sort of erase the stark highlight and sort of blend it into the last layer that you did. It takes a little bit of practice, but when you get the right consistency on your paint and make sure that everything is still like fairly wet and not tacky. You don't want the paint to be tacky, because then you'll just end up pulling it up, and you don't want that, because then you'll have to like basically start over. So it's a pain in the ass. So now we're moving on to some scale 75 white paint, and what we're going to do is we're going to edge highlight all these ice blocks. So I'm going to do like 2 lines in this video, and then it's going to cut, and you're going to see what it looks like when it's finished. Because if I was to sit here and talk about edge highlighting over all of this stuff, it would be really boring, and you guys would like have to leave because you'd be sleeping. So yeah, so there's what it looks like when it's done. So we got our dark spots, we got our edge highlighting. It's pretty important to go all the way around each block of ice with white, because it's what really sells that ice feel. So now we're taking out the Citadel white dry paint, whatever the hell that's called. We're gonna take most of it off of the brush, and then we're just gonna go to town here on the ice. This is also gonna help with that cloudy effect that ice has. The top layer of ice is usually a lot more frozen, so it's harder to see through. So it's going to have that cloudy look to it. So we're just going to sort of build that up slowly as we dry brush on this Citadel dry paint, which is absolutely fantastic for this. So again, we're not being gentle with this at all. We're just dry brushing the living bejesus out of it. After I do the first layer, I don't go back to the pot. I just take whatever paint's left on the paper towel, and we're going back, and we're being super rough with it now, because I actually want to see some of the brush strokes, because we're going to put etches and stuff into the ice. And, I find that if you start with a dry brush layer first for this, it works out better, because it gives that faded look, and then you can go back in with a fine tip brush and actually put in the actual lines for it. So here I'm just sort of trying to fade the ones that I thought were too stark in, but you can see like we got scratches and whatnot in the ice now, and now I'm just going in with a thin brush, and I'm just going to add where it is at its thickest, and it sort of gives it that extra added depth that there's layers and layers of frozen water. So yeah, there's all that stuff added. And then we're going to move on to the final step in the actual painting of the ice, and we're going to add another glaze in over top of this, just to add that another layer of depth, really. It's a lot of glazing back and forth. You just kind of got to play with it until you're happy with what you're doing. So again, I'm just kind of mixing paint on the fly here. It's I want like a lighter tone, but a mid lighter tone, and it has to be super thin, because you want to still see all that white through the paint. So you can see on my thumb there that it was fairly thin. We're going over in it, and it's just like filter tinting everything that lighter turquoise color, and it's sort of bringing everything back down in line. We're gonna hit every single shard with this, being careful not to cover too much of the edge highlighting that we did for the around all these ice chunks. And there we go. So now we're gonna get set up to put some snow on here. Yeah, snow any minute now. I think this is the point where I realized that I was recording but thought I wasn't. Whatever, it was a mistake. Okay, so here we go. We're gonna slather on some Valhallan Earth, I think it's called, or Valhallan Blizzard from Citadel. This stuff's great. You can mix your own snow just using basic baking soda, PVA glue, and water. This stuff I tend to like a little bit more because it's got like little sparkles in it, so it actually looks like snow when it's all dried up. And I think there might actually be some like gloss varnish in here or something too, that it gives it a bit of a sheen, which snow has, especially when it's freshly fallen snow. So here we go. We're just packing it all in there, and it looks like absolute garbage right now, and you're thinking, oh my god, all that paintwork you just did, you just ruined it. Well, wait. So next we're going to do, after we pack it all on there, is we are going to pick the direction the wind's going to go, and we're just going to sweep it off. So we're sweeping off, letting it build up in the recesses, packed up against the upper ledges of the snow. Making sure that we do actually want brush strokes, because wind will actually use the snow and it'll erode the top layer of ice and it'll etch into it. So you actually want brush strokes when you're doing this, because it'll show that. Yeah, and then there we go. So one thing you need to remember when you're doing this is you absolutely need to do all your brush strokes in the same direction, because if you don't, it'll fuck everything up and it won't look right. So yeah, so that's Ice Bases by Marrok, quick and dirty, and hopefully this helps you guys make ice bases of your own. So until next time, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.